Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fireside Chat number 43. And today's topic is going to be from MVP to scalable product. And this is a topic that we were actually talking about it not that long ago. So last week we were at DES, the Digital Enterprise Show in Malaya. We had a stand there, and we were asked to participate in some of the panels. And we had quite a good conversation with one of our clients who's basically scaling up now a business that started as sort of like an incubation program, no, an MVP type of thing. And we thought that was pretty interesting, product. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're someone in charge of innovation in a big corporation, or you're basically thinking about how to test your ideas, I think this is something that everyone needs to know about. No? So without further ado, let's well, with one thing before that, if you like the topic, if you like these talks and so on, remember this is unscripted. We just pick a topic beforehand, we'll discuss it, and if you want to know more, figure out when we're going to be discussing more stuff, just hit the notification, subscribe, and leave comments. We're always happy to read them, and if there's good topics, bring them into the conversation as well, right? So without further ado, let's jump into it. And I think the title is from MVP to scalable product, and there's a lot of misconceptions around what an MVP is. So maybe we should start there and give a brief definition. Let's say what we're talking about when we're discussing MVPs.
Mash,
You're the
you are
definition.
the
You're the
official
definition guy.
definition guy, right? So
I don't like this stereotype of the definition guy, the stickler. So, okay. All right. Let's start with the definition. So it's been a long time actually since I read a Lean Startup, Eric Ries's book. In fact, it was quite close to when we started Codurance, in fact. And if anyone hasn't read it, I really recommend it. But I think the idea comes from there, of the MVP. And the thing is to do the minimum viable thing to validate your product idea, right? So in my personal view, it's different from a prototype. You are releasing a product, right? So from a customer's perspective, you are releasing a product, and it's not just to kind of try out something and experiment with it. It's actually release it in the market, get the feedback, and see if you need to build on it or pivot away from it to try out a different business idea or related business idea. So it's kind of that build, measure, and then respond or
learn.
adopt. I'm not sure what the third
Build,
part
measure,
is.
learn.
I think
Build, measure,
learn.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of to create that feedback loop. But the idea is that you do actually create something that your customers use, and from that usage, from that adoption, you learn, and then you either build on it or you pivot away from that particular idea. So that's how I see a minimum viable product, the minimum thing you can do to validate your idea in the market.
Yeah. One thing that I would add there is that people usually, when they think of MVPs, they think of a minimum set of features, no, or minimum marketable products, which is a different thing. So what is the thing that, what is the minimum product that you can take to market and people will actually pay for it and so on? This is not what we're talking about, right? So you could be validating a hypothesis that you have in your idea and that not be a fully fledged product by any means, right? Like in many cases in the the Lean Startup the Lean Startup book and so on, like they talk about a sort of a few strategies, fake it until you make it, the things that maybe you're validating some sort of recommendation engine or whatever. Well, if you don't have it at the beginning and you have someone doing the recommendations manually, that's still a valid approach to validating the idea. It doesn't scale, which will bring us to it doesn't scale, but it is a way to check that it works.
Yeah, I think that there are teams or organizations they really need to understand what they're trying to achieve, because I see those, like for example MVP used in a very loosely way. So for example, we mentioned here a few things. validate an idea. What is the size of that idea? So, because you also mentioned was a minimum marketable product, if I'm not wrong. So, in order to have a minimum marketable product, you are really at the beginning of your development, because you need to build potentially a set of features that together they will be the minimum viable product. There's also an understanding of, so for example, one thing is to say, where are you in your stage? Are you trying to, are you starting completely from scratch, which means that you need to build a set of cohesive features very, very quickly so that you have a cohesive product, the minimum viable product, or you already have a product and you are just, the MVP is about one of the features of your product. So those are slightly different modes in my view. The other thing that Mesh also mentioned was a prototype, which for me is also a very different mindset as well, because prototype, you are trying to validate if certain things are viable, not necessarily from the commercial perspective. Quite often we use the prototype more to indicate, can we use those technologies together? Maybe we are creating this product, but this product uses some AI, some whatever blockchain or whatever technology you are trying to put together, and just see if that would be viable. Mesh, I think you want to say something. I have more things to say,
I
but,
just like, because the viable word is also in minimum viable product, and I was thinking more about feasibility. Is it like, I have an idea, I'm going to build it like this. Is it feasible? It prototype. I completely agree. It's related to more. It's more related to the solution and not about learning from the market, but learning whether we can do it. I mean, obviously these things are arbitrary, but that's how I normally see the
I would add something more where I kind of stray a little bit from what Sandra is saying, is that for me it has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with validating your business model. And sometimes technology is a way to do that. But let's say let's say that I want to start a business where people subscribe, and I send them food, a box full of fresh ingredients, 0 mile kind of thing, with recipes and whatever. Well, of course I could go and build stuff and try to. I could also go to a supermarket, get someone to sign, and give me 20 euros, right, and go to their house and deliver something and give them a recipe that what I mean, like I did all of that manually. And what I'm for me, that would be an MVP.
no,
For me,
but
that
we
would
are
be
aligned.
validating that
Yeah.
idea.
No, we are aligned. I was just trying to say, I said exactly that. Like MVP normally has a business connotation, or trying to prove a business idea. When we are talking about prototyping, as Mesh said, we are more talking about the feasibility of the solution. Can we actually create that? Can we actually use certain technologies to make that thing feasible? And the reason that I'm creating this distinction is because the operating mode that the companies have and the kind of expectations that the sponsors have, they should be different in those things. Another thing is like the size of the MVPs, because some people wait for the minimum viable product, but they are, for example, they have one MVP, and after that MVP, now they go straight to a scalable product. Other companies, they have a sequence of MVPs. They're always doing MVP. Everything that they do is an MVP. Is one MVP built on top of another MVP, which is the product. When they use this approach, the word product, the P, becomes a small issue in there, because but they treat like that. They treat a sequence of MVPs. And there is another, there is just another. Go on, if you want to, yeah, go on.
No, go for it. Sorry.
No, I was just trying to give a sense of all the many different types of modes that you can operate, because these will generate certain behaviors and expectations. There is another one that is, although some companies call them MVP, and sometimes they like to think about they're doing MVPs, there is a more design thinking approach that is slightly different. Quite often they already have a set of clients, let's say a B2B, for example. So a company already has a product, has already a few clients that are other companies. So they know their clients well. And sometimes they have ideas for a feature. But this mode is very different from I'm opening a new market, which means doing user research is very complicated because I don't even know who my potential clients might be, from I already know who my potential clients are. And in this case, like instead of build, measure, and learn, you first learn, you go there, you speak to your clients, you propose their features, see their needs and stuff. So when you actually build the feature, you build the feature already with a purpose. So you are still innovating, you are still experimenting new features, but you have more certainty of the usefulness or the how useful that feature would be because you can trust your customers. And this is again a very different mode of operating, and that is more aligned to the design thinking than and MVPs.
To lean startup.
To lean startup, yes. So.
I actually have an anecdote, and Sandro, you'll remember this, right? We used to, when uh, we used to run these hands-on sessions for the London software craftsmanship community. We still run them, by the way, but not Sandro and I. We don't run them ourselves anymore. But one of the katas, or one of the sessions we used to run, was called the Lean Startup Kata, and it was absolutely enlightening because once we ran it, I don't know if you remember, but one of the pairs, so you'd always the
I
way
know
it
which
was
example it is.
the way that you would, so the way that this kata worked was that it had a server, and you would listen to it, and then it would throw a question at you, and you would answer that question, and every time you answer the question right, it gave you like 3 points. But if you answered it wrong, it gave you -1. But if you didn't answer, it gave you 0. So you kind of had this kind of point system, and there was a leaderboard. So everyone kind of hooked up to it, and then it would throw random questions at you. And each time you would see the question, you would code your server so it would answer this question. And we found that one of the groups started always getting the question right, but they were not like moving up on the leaderboard so much. And then suddenly they started going up, but in a very consistent way. And then suddenly they started actually accelerating in the leaderboard to the point where they were by far the winner. And then afterwards, we asked them, like, what was the kata is called Lean Startup Kata, I think. We'll send a link as well if we can. And then we asked the pair, like, what was their strategy? Because obviously they won first of all, and they kind of grew in they won by a big margin. And they said the first thing they started doing was every time the question would come, and this is the fake it till you make it thing. Every time a question would come, all they did, the first thing they said was, you know what? We will read the server will read the question and do a command prompt, which would print the question and you would answer it yourself. so
they had a
pair,
breakpoint, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
I think they had a breakpoint, and then they would answer.
No, it wasn't the breakpoint. It was a read line, so it was a command prompt.
Ah, right.
So,
I see. Yeah.
so basically, one would be basically what they say. It would come prompt, and they would answer the question type, and then next one. So one pair was all they were doing was reading the prompt, answering the question, reading the prompt, answering the question. So the first thing they built was this manual ability, a very simple bit of feature. Take the question, stick it on the command line, wait for the user, like one of the developers, to answer it. Then the second part, what the other pair, what they were doing was every time they would see, they would kind of hold it. So they would print it out and they would look at the question and they would hard code the answer for that question. So it was like a key value thing, question, look up answer, question, look up answer. So then they built this thing where every time they would get it, they would put it in, he would hard code it, but if it didn't find, it would prompt and the other one would answer it. So they had this flow going where at every single point they were answering questions manually, but then automating it as they go along. And then the way I think the kata worked is that somehow you could work out some things and you could build more intelligence, and you can, to the point where they got to the point where they didn't have to answer any questions because they had got all the different variations already, and then they just sat back and relaxed. And this is actually a very good lesson, and the kata teaches you quite well in in the whole kind of lean startup mentality. It's the whole kind of fake it until you make it, because from a customer point of view, you're trying to validate the market, and as quickly and cheaply as you can validate, because this is back to the whole idea of cost of delay versus reputational damage, right? Like initially when you're going to market, you might be one of the few ones going into market, and you are prioritizing the cost of delay issue, right? So you're getting there first, even if you cannot scale, if you're like doing manual things and here and there, you're getting there first. You're kind of starting to service, you're building the customer, but you're learning about the customer as well. And then slowly behind the scenes, you're actually doing this scaling aspect, so that you can service more and more of the market as you learn more from the market, basically.
But for me, this it's important for companies to recognize which mode they are on. But most importantly, for example, on the technical side, it's very important that we also understand that, because, for example, if we are working, I would say something now, but we may go back to it. But I think that MVP and the lean startup sometimes a bit overrated. I'll just leave it at that. We can explore that later if you want.
I'll throw that bomb in there.
Exactly. But I think that MVP and lean startup is a bit overrated. So the reason for example, one thing that is very important for the development team or the technology department to understand is, if this is the operating mode from the business, that means this is what they want. Look, we're going to be throwing things out, and we're going to measure, and then we're going to learn, and then keep evolving. You need to architect your system for that to work. This is not the same as just hack the code and write any shit in there just to be fast, because this will only work. Like, for example, just cut a lot of corners. This will only work to go fast for the first, second, maybe third iteration of push out there, measure, and learn. But if you want to do that consistently, you cannot have something that is falling apart. You need to architect your system in a way that is very easy to experiment, but also to collect the data, to measure that. All of those things, they need to be architected. And sometimes I see people that don't understand that. They think that architecture only happens when you are scaling a product. No, you need to design your architecture in a way where those experiments are easy to make, and then you can get a valid result so that you can learn. But this doesn't come for free. It doesn't come just hacking. See what I'm saying?
No, I totally. And this is actually the difference, I would say, between a prototype and an MVP. A prototype, the intention is to validate and throw away. An MVP is not, that's not the intention. MVP methodology does not tell you on how well you build your system underneath. In fact, how well you build your platform so that it allows you to build a flexible product on top, and even the one that you can pivot on, right? MVP is more about the amount of effort you put in to take your idea to market. But it does not mean that your engineering is shoddy to the point that everything that you've done that needs to be thrown away to build to actually create the real product in the end. I think
there's a constraint that I think both of you are ignoring, which is a lot of the times when you're going this way and you're a startup and you're trying to, you don't have any money, right? Or you don't have any resources at your disposal. I mean, some companies do, yeah, for sure, and they can invest in let's say using the right practices and the right tools and the right technology in order to make all of those things scalable later on, but at the same time easy to change and easy to but getting software engineers with that set of skills, or getting using the technologies, will cost you money, right?
But I think Jose, that's a false dichotomy. A well-engineered solution costing money. It depends how you build it. It depends on the solution.
No. What I'm saying is, it depends how you build it. But you're talking from the point of view of you yourself validating a thing where you have all of this knowledge and you can do it yourself. But a lot of the times, what I've seen is, a guy from a marketing background getting together with a guy from a sales background or whatever, and then trying to get shit done, right? And then they because they don't have a technical partner or someone with that knowledge. They go outside and they are constrained by this kind of stuff, right? So they, what I'm trying to say is there is a factor there that we're not considering. We're just assuming, at least in the conversation, is like, yes, we could build it because we have the knowledge to do it. Why doesn't everyone? And the reality is not everyone has the knowledge or the resources in order to get someone with the knowledge to help them build this.
But the thing
In that
is,
way.
again, this is like if you follow like initially when you're building these kind of things, we're not saying that you over engineer your solution or your platform,
No.
right? In fact, building these things, relying on commodity stuff, gluing it all up together so that you can. The point is that you're not spending effort that then so much, you're minimizing the amount of effort that you then have to throw away. You're minimizing waste, right? So if your solution is intelligent enough, where you are using commodity as much as you can, and just building those little bits that you can to try out that idea. In fact, you are talking about a very lean solution. You need to be as lean as you can. But being lean does not mean that you creating lots of effort that you're gonna throw away. Being
This is
lean actually means
precisely.
that
I
sorry, go on, sir.
agree, but it also doesn't mean that you're building the thing from scratch. Like a
No.
lot of these
No,
things,
no.
you could just grab, WordPress, put on some plugins, and you can start selling
Exactly.
beef
That's
jerky
what I
to
mean.
sure.
your
Yeah.
friends. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like there's not a
But it shows something that you can easily change without like destroying the house, because this is the difference that we were making between a prototype and an MVP. Because like you are not just writing an MVP and throwing away every time that you learn. So for example, you cannot start from scratch in every iteration of your MVP. You need to push something else, you measure. But in order to measure, you need to design the system to actually measure. This is to measure what you want. So this needs to be codified or architected in a way. It's like when you push that out, what do we want to learn from this? So this becomes a requirement from the solution. And when you learn, this is not the only learning that you're making. You don't do that cycle once. This is what I was saying. Most companies, they say, look, we're going to release one or two, three features. You're going to measure them. One might succeed. One maybe need to give a little bit more time. This one we need to change. So, but I cannot so for the one that needs to change, I cannot rebuild the other two. So for example, so that's what I'm saying. So you need to design your system. So you are still evolving a system, and you are doing one MVP after another, but you need to understand what are the places that I want that are more, it's not vulnerable. What is a similar word to that? Volatile. What are the areas that are still more volatile, that are the ones that are really experimenting, but in order to be a product, it needs to have some features that are stable. Because if everything is unstable, then it is more a prototype than anything else. But you cannot see what I'm saying. You cannot be rewriting the entire thing in every sprint. So you need to design for that.
There is a trade-off. Before you mentioned expectations as well, no, and this happens particularly when you have stakeholders, no, like if you're doing this as part of an innovation lab, or someone put money into it and they're expecting some sort of returns on it, which is while you're validating, you're let's say the trade-off is speed of learning, right? And or as Matt was saying as well, no, the cost of delay to some extent, no. But once you get there, let's say once you go, by the way, this whole MVP and the startup thing builds on top of another thing called the customer development process by Steve Banks, right? Like the whole problem solution fit and product market fit, right? So when you are going through that and you validated your solution and you kind of have an idea of how to, if you have a business model that's sustainable and you want to scale, then whether you like it or not, the approach needs to be a bit different, right? Like, because speed then doesn't necessarily become the most important thing. It is still important, right? And you still want that agility and that ability to do this MVPs and continue exploring and learning, right? quickly, but you also have a bunch of clients. Hopefully you have a bunch of clients that are already depending on your platform. No? So if something breaks or if it stops working or whatever, it's no longer, oh, nobody comes to this site. No, it's like maybe you have a lot of people who are depending on you, and that could kill the business as well, right? And this expectation management on speed versus stability of the platform and so on, I think is also a mindset shift for when you go from an MVP or initial state of validation of the business model with technology into scaling that technology or product. No.
So there is one thing: is does it have to be? And this is like it's more a thought experiment, really. Does it have to be speed versus scale? Can we not have like you're always trying out new ideas, yeah, and certain ideas work and others don't, and you can have a series of MVPs. I mean, that's if you have a good innovative company or product, then you'd always be there's a set that you are solidifying and scaling up, and other things that you are trying out, right? And do you have to have the same approach to both? Can the two not coexist within the same product?
I think you can, but again, in order to do that, from my perspective, if you're building the thing yourself, yeah, if you're building the thing yourself, you need to be building it with the right practices in mind from the beginning, right? So that you are able to have this, the cost of change to be low and not to be something that is basically, you're sacrificing speed because you want change. And if you don't have that, and do well, what's the forgot the quote, right? Like do the change easy and then do the easy change,
Make the change
make
easy
the
and
change
then make
easy
the
and,
easy
and make
change.
the easy change. That kind of approach, yeah, that XP etc brings in. You need to be thinking that way, and you need to be making sure that anything that you do is sort of repeatable or very low effort to repeat. This is why things like starting with automation, with infrastructure as code, etc., and cloud providers like managed services and so on is key, because yes, it's a cost, but you're that cost is paying for itself. No, in all of the time spent in managing or setting things up and reconfiguring and so on, right? But those things are the foundation to be able to get that agility, right? From my perspective, you do need those practices if you want to build something that is both flexible, agile, and it can
And
scale
having
and it can
actually, and not just a platform, but having a good kind of build by partner strategy as well, right from
yeah,
the very start.
yeah.
Because if you try to reinvent everything, it's gonna be difficult to you're gonna have a more complex software that's
and
difficult
and
to
exactly. And as I said before, like a lot of the times the technology is a means to an end, right? Like it will help you validate the thing. You can try your WordPress with a template first, and if you have a business, then you can go and customize the template. And like basically the whole point of this is to de-risk your investment on continuing in that direction. No, so the
But
justification of what you've learned is what justifies for you to continue investing
but
on
see,
the.
this is aligned to what I was saying. So, for example, you are creating a simpler solution, but it's a solution that was designed. For example, when you chose the WordPress and stuff, you already know that I can start this way, and if that works, I could evolve this way if I need to. But that was designed by that. So you chose to use WordPress for a reason, so that if we need them to bring in, that is separate enough, you can carve that out, you can bring the new piece. So there is a design that goes in there. There is some engineering that
there is
goes
an
in there.
evolution strategy that you
Exactly.
have. Yeah.
So you are going for a simpler solution. We are going for something that needs to be done quickly, but you are not always. Again, this is not a prototype. You're not always keen to throw everything away, start
Throw
from
everything away,
scratch.
yeah.
So you have an evolution, and also there is a difference between aiming for scalability than aiming for stability. And for me, those are very different things. So even when you are in the experimentation, things needs to still remain stable, because like sometimes you're trying to bring in a new feature and stuff and your system is always flaky, it's always full of errors. Sometimes some people will say, look, I'm not going to use this because it's a piece of crap, and they will not see the great idea if it's not stable. It might not
This
scale
this
because they don't
also
need to scale, but at least it works. That's what I mean.
this also goes back to who's your client and that kind of stuff, because another thing that comes hand in hand with the whole MVP methodology, is the diffusion of innovation curve, right? And the whole chasm, at 16% of adoption, where you have innovators, early adopters, then early majority, late majority, and laggers. No, those are kind of like the segments. And the people who are innovators and early adopters, they don't care. They will help you build the product. They will tolerate this defects and so on, because you are really solving a problem that they needed to get solved and they didn't find anything. You are trying to, so they're happy to help you with that. But as soon as you want to jump the chasm, and go into really scaling the product, which, by the way, when I say scale, is also scaling the business, right? That early majority requires a different approach. They need to see the product differently, right? That they need to see it as a complete solution. Like things like who's using it are is important, right? Like, hey, Match is using, or who's like, oh, this client, this other guy who's my competition is using your product. Maybe we should check it out. Maybe there's something in there. That kind of social proof becomes also very important, right? And if you start trying to let's say scale, or this whole referral programs, etc., when your product is still crappy, what you're doing is creating a negative effect on that, no? Because then people will tell other people how crappy or unreliable or whatever is your thing. So it's very important to know where you've reached that balance, where your product is more solves very well the problem that you want to solve, and it's stable and so on, and then you can continue moving into other areas, which is a common mistake.
And while you're saying that, one thing I was thinking is that your ability to pivot at the degree at which you pivot starts becoming less and less, because as customers start relying on your product, you can't just pivot completely. Your kind of revolutions in pivot become evolutions. You kind of start stabilizing, because if you pivot too much, you're gonna leave your existing customer bases behind. So you kind of reach a particular level. At that point, you're no longer throwing that away.
But that
Unless you
is
want to
okay
throw away
if
your
you are
market.
really. But that for me is okay if you are really going into a different. No, like if you're going into the early majority and you start losing some of the
Momentum, yeah.
early adopters,
Mhm.
I think that's okay, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the same as the first people who bought an iPhone. They don't necessarily be still owning an iPhone. No, it may be too mainstream for them, right? Like
Mhm.
this is the thing, right? So it is okay if there is that change, as long as you're really moving in the right direction and you're scaling. The changes
Yeah.
do have a purpose. This is another thing that in this book, it's called Crossing the Chasm, where it talks about the idea of the bowling alley, and the different segments, and basically where you focus in the market is kind of like a pin, like a bowling pin, and you can be in a very good position to knock with one pin, knock other pins off, right? Like let's say you're focusing on and on doctors in a particular segment on healthcare, and then from there you could move to nurses, or you could move to doctors in a different segment. Like there's your product is not that far away, so that the jump is completely out of the ordinary. You can evolve into a segment that is, let's say, within the vicinity, and that's how you kind of as you conquer this segment is when you cross the chasm, no, when you get that traction that is good enough so that the early majority and so on can be interested in your product, no?
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, go on, Sandra.
no, I would change a little bit. I would just talk
That's
about
what I was gonna do as well.
Yeah.
right. So I would push for the MVPs, and in startup is overrated. But like I'm happy to go with whatever you had in mind, man.
No,
No, well,
okay.
go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what do
go
you?
for it.
Why do you think it's overrated? Let's say.
Okay. So of course that I don't have the
Poor
data.
guys to the
Okay.
fire.
Right.
Like, tell us. We really.
Right. So of course, like I don't have the concrete data, and I also cannot, like, for people listening. Before Codurance and many years ago, I tried a startup myself that was a product, and I failed miserably. And I know that I don't want to make the mistake of taking my only experience and generalize as if it was the rule. So with all that caveat in place, but for example, I believe that
With all
most
that
people.
caveat in place, I'm gonna generalize right
No,
now.
because like I also, like, during that year that I tried a startup, it wasn't a product. I was hanging around a lot of startup groups in London. I met a lot of people trying to do the same things and stuff, right? So, and over the years, even after, like, for example, when we started Codurance, we worked for some startups ourselves, and most of them don't exist today. And that's like precisely the point that I was trying to make. I believe that most of us would agree that the vast majority of startups don't survive their first year, right? So some people talk about 90% of them will fail, some people will vary a bit, but it's around that scale. 1 in 10, maybe even more, will succeed, or at least will survive the second year, and then a smaller percentage will actually become a business and survive beyond the second year. But the
If
first
you
year
make
will
it through the third year, then
exactly.
you're kind of safe.
So basically, like I don't know, like I'm finger in the air because I don't remember the numbers by heart. But let's say, like, out of 100, maybe 5 to 10
Mhm.
might get to the third year, maybe even around 5, maybe, right? So when we look at those numbers, we can start asking ourselves, what is wrong with that? Because, like, for example, this thing about do the simplest thing could possibly work, push it out there, experiment, measure, and learn. This is not as cheap as people think. Because, like, for example, mainly if you are in a B2C market, like business to consumer, those experiments, you are nobody. No one knows about your shit. So when you push it out there, it's not that it's going to have like 1,000 people using your stuff in the first week, and you can measure and say, look, I have enough information to now make bigger decisions and change. So this takes a long time. B2C is a horrible business to be if you don't have very, very deep pockets, because you will be in this cycle of release, measure, learn, and so on and so forth. These will go on forever because those experiments are not so fast, mainly because no one knows your stuff, right? So if you don't know your customers. So this is the problem, that people think that this is a good idea, that it's easier. But this is not as simple. This is what I'm saying is overrated. Of course, it would not help. It would not change the fact that if you try to even make it even worse, that is thinking about scalability in that scenario, it would make it just even worse. You just like have much larger cycles. But what I'm trying to say is this thing about just push out there, measure and learn. It sounds very simple, but it's a very inefficient way to start a business, because the chances of you succeeding is very, very small. Just a few people that can do that continuously and putting a lot of money for a long time, or are really, really building something extremely unique or solving a problem that is very niche, the chance of surviving in that industry is tiny. I prefer the more design thinking to say, like, you know what, instead of me pushing stuff out, I will speak to a few potential clients. I'll see if I can get those clients even before I start pushing stuff off and learn. I will learn first. I'll go out there. This is the mistake that I made, because I was doing B2C. And then later on, when I was almost dying, I pivoted that to B2B. And that model is much easier to say, look, you know what? I'm going to try to learn first, because I don't have deep pockets. I cannot keep this going forever, right? Regardless of the size of my iterations. So I would do some learning first and making sure that I can get to something being used and generating profit as fast as possible. But that's what I'm saying. A lot of people trying this model. We're gonna push stuff out and learn. They rely. That's why they need to go and ask for funding.
Uh,
I'm not sure lean
I
startup is like that, to be honest.
exactly.
But this is
Because
what
lean
people say:
startup
like
talks
iterate
about
fast, push, measure, and learn.
no, but it is actually it's you create hypothesis, you research the market, you do all the market research and everything else. You then create a bet that this thing after my research, and so there is lean startup. I don't think excludes some of the stuff that design thinking has,
On
right?
the contrary, it
Yeah.
actually so just this is where I see the misconception. You're talking about lean startup as just the, I'm going to build something, going to try it out, and then going to learn from that. That is a very small part, yeah, of what the lean startup is trying to accomplish. Again, as I said before, this builds on something called the customer development model, and the if you know, Steve Bang has a book called Four Steps to Epiphany, where he describes, what are those four steps. First you have something called problem solution fit, which is basically I validate that there is a problem strong enough that people want to get solved, yeah, and I have a solution that is good enough so that people will be able to pay for that. Then you move to the next stage. By the way, when you're validating that, I used to do problem interviews and solution interviews. So basically I would go to people, do almost like a UX research interview to understand, what the context, how they use it, where they, like what are my competitors, like all of that stuff. Like it's all without building anything. And this is for me part of that MVP mindset that I was talking about. It's not just technology. Yeah, it's the learning. Like build, measure, learn. It's like create a form, go grab some people on the street or whatever on the street or whatever I need to validate, and get that. So that's the first part. Then there's the second part, which is the product market fit, which is okay. I know that I have a solution. Can I build a business around it? Is there a model that will allow me to sustain this thing, right? Like, will people pay for my subscription? Am I the right place that for me to make money or not? And so on. What is the volume? Like all of the stuff. And you're also validating at this point that you have repeatable channels, right? That you know who your customer is, et cetera, et cetera. So you're able to basically say, if I put money in this thing, yeah, I know that I'm going to get X amount because I will grow, putting it into marketing, because for every $10 that I put in, I get X amount back, right? That's what you're trying to do on that. And then there's scaling, which is when after you solve that, if you're doing this properly, then you go and find funding, because then you need the money for sure. Then is when you say, okay, now I want to open in Spain, in Portugal, in France, and I now have a repeatable model, no, that only needs money in order to make that happen. Yeah. So again, there's a misconception there. It talks about, there's also lots of tools like validation boards, or the link canvas, and the business model canvas, or like all of these tools. They're basically, what are the questions that you need to answer around your business model in order to do that. And the thing is, for me, answering those questions is doing MVPs. Yeah, like is okay. So I want to check that I have a repeatable channel, or that this customer that I think has this problem, etc. What is the minimum thing that I need to do in order to validate that?
I take that, but I think that and I take that. The point that I was also making is like, this is not so cheap. This is not something that you do, because all those research, like, it's not just I'm gonna go out in my neighborhood and I'm gonna ask what people think. This is not good enough to justify a full initiative, unless that you are doing something for your neighborhood, right? So, but then, for example, for me, every time that you write, put some technology together and you experiment and you learn, there is a cost to that. Of course, there is a learning, but then you iterate. So, for example, if that was not what's going to sustain your business, you need to iterate again. There is another cost in that. So, for example, what we see in a lot of startups, you mentioned already, they start something, and the first thing that they need to do, look for funding. So when I was in the startup circles, like, so the vast majority of people, their business plan relied, like I swear, like out of 100 people, probably at least 90 would rely on funding to get their ideas off the ground. And this is, for me, is already a problem with the model. It's already a problem. Oh, we are going to try. We're going to see if it works. If it doesn't work, we change and stuff. With which money? With someone else's money, until you find the formula. And this is sometimes I find that those ideas, and I was in that boat myself, are not sustainable. They failed on thinking about the business model, something that would actually bring money to their company, that would make their company sustainable. And most of them were software initiatives, which the investment is far smaller than having a warehouse, building a factory, or stuff like that. And so this is what I'm saying, that
I understand what you mean, and I would say yes to some extent. Yes, so the expectations in the let's call it venture capital world when it comes to startups, no, is that first is the three F's: friends, family, and fools. Yeah, so you will put your own money, yeah, you will get people around you to put money on that, and then there will be people who no, that's kind of like no, it
I
is
never heard.
it's the
I never
three
heard
F's.
about the
Friends,
friends,
family, and
family,
fools.
and
Exactly. That's the first round,
I
and then
like
you
that.
have angel investors, right? And groups of angel investors, and which is seed capital, which is things like I'm going to put 60K in your project. Yeah. So I have money. There there's incubators and all of these project or groups with angel investors, right? Basically, what they do is they search for opportunities, they present those opportunities to their investors. The investors decide whether to put money or not. So that will be a first round of investment. It could be, I don't know, 200K. Yeah. 200K for someone who's eating ramen and sleeping at the office, you know what I mean? Like that can last a very long time. So again, it's this mindset of how do you make the most with the least amount of resources, right? And having that runway, to either as much as possible and to learn until you get to a point where you
Mhm.
start, figuring it out. No, like you actually start making money, and then you can build on top of that, and then if you need that, then you move to the next one, and to the next one, and so on, right? And
The-
it's what they
yeah.
call like the hockey puck stick figure, right? Like that ramp where you're like, hey, I'm getting customers. Look, it's going up. It's going. What I really need now is no, is money to be able to make that thing shoot up. Yeah. So yeah.
There is, like, I get that. I think that I think that we can, because we are running out of time. But like, so those different modes, without going too much on details on these ones, they set. I think what is important for people listening, understanding this context, set certain expectations for the development teams. The way the developers will work in that context will be significantly different, right? So according to the stage that the company is, how they're doing the experimentation, how the project is being funded as well. And one thing that we haven't talked about is that the lean startup, because I read the book myself a long time ago, maybe I had forgotten parts of it, but one thing that I remember seeing, that you could also apply the same principle in a very large organization. It's not only for people working from their bedroom. We can have large organizations still applying the same concept and trying to push some products or some innovations in their departments using the concept of lean startup. And that is, for me, but normally with the way they go about that tend to be a bit different then.
Yeah, so this is another thing, right? Like you have that, because everything that we talked about is related to culture, right? Even the practices and this kind of mindset and all that. And I feel like that's one of the aspects that is harder to maintain with scale, and especially well, with scale, and when you're trying to innovate within a culture that is already not like that, right? Like if you're part of an incubator inside a corporate or something like that, there's a lot of friction in culture itself, because as you grow, when it's three people, collaboration happens. You have four conversations, you get it done, everyone knows what to do, etc. When it's 10, when it's 50, problems simply start multiplying, and collaboration is not the same, and so on. So how do you manage to get that same culture or mindset or collaboration as you're scaling your business, which, given, if you're doing a product, might not necessarily need to scale like that, but in the case of a service like ours or something like that, it does need more people, no, in order
A
to.
devil's advocate question: should the culture be the same? Because you are in a completely different context now. Should we keep the same context culture
I
of?
would say that there are certain things about the culture that you don't want to lose because they are an advantage to you, and certain things. And again, this goes back to Warley Maps and a lot of this stuff. No, it's like customer centricity. So if you really want to, you need to keep the customer at the center. The minute that you start thinking about something else, you're on your way out the door for someone else to get the lead. Yeah. There is the experimentation aspect, which I think is super important as well, and it gets lost. Yeah. And the collaboration aspect. So that go and see kind of mindset, or founder mentality within the organization, I think is necessary. The minute that that's not there anymore, people start focusing on other stuff.
Larger organization, as organizations grow, they often become more and more centralized, and you get and siloed as well, right? And I think it was in the Lean Startup book that they talk about, like almost like a company made up of startups, right? So you've got these much smaller departments that are very close to the customer, right? And it's easier said than done. I think it's a very good thing to try to keep, but it's easier said than done. A lot of the times, the the fact that it's a much larger organization already starts building these central structures, and suddenly you no longer you can't be a company just made up of startups, because a company has a direction in itself, right? And so it has its own momentum. It has, so you unless you go very much kind of a very organic style of management, and I've not seen many companies adopt that style, they do become centralized. And as soon as they become centralized, they do a lot of the major parts of it become distant from the customer as well.
And they need
So
to stabilize, right, Mesh? Because, like, for example, one of the whole points of all these pivoting that you have at the beginning is to actually find the identity of your product and your target market, right? So, okay, now I know what those people want. That's the kind of problem that my product will satisfy. And once you found that, you cannot just, now that you are building a base of clients that rely on your products on a daily basis and stuff, and all of a sudden say, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to do something else. So it cannot be like that. So the degree of experiments, they are now much smaller compared to the software that you have. You don't pivot the entire software. You might experiment with a few features, a few add-ons that you might bring, maybe create a wider ecosystem around your software. But you cannot just like do the kind of things that you had at the beginning, because you need stability for your own clients. See what I'm saying?
and you can achieve innovation in different ways as well, and most companies don't get it right. Like if you look at things like, for example, the likes of Google, right? Why do they have to acquire, or Facebook? Why do they have to acquire innovative companies? Why can't they do innovation themselves, right? And often, primarily, is this inertia. Being successful in a particular market in itself can be a curse, because you are now stabilized trying to serve that market, and you've scaled it. And I think there is a compromise that you made internally in your culture, because you're now facing up to scale rather than this constant kind of primordial soup of innovation, right? So there is something has to give within the organization. You can't be that startup anymore, or a startup of startups. You have to have certain uh, structures built in to be able to scale. But on the other hand, other companies still manage innovation quite well, right? They can still create parts of organization that are actually creating doing this kind of quick feedback, trying out new things, and so on, and other parts that are actually scaling up to and stabilizing the market that they currently have,
Yeah.
but not often, and not for a long time. I mean, people like Apple come to mind, but even they haven't. They, you can already see that innovation has stopped, and it's just an incremental improvements on what they already have.
No, but they build the ecosystem. This is what I was saying because, like at the very beginning, this is why I say that. Of course, there are aspects of your culture that you want to keep, but it cannot be exactly the same culture because you are in a very different context with different priorities as well. At the beginning, we are just trying to survive. You need to find your niche. You need to find what you're trying to do. You don't even know who your customers are or what they want. If you are able to survive that phase, you now are in a space where you know who your current clients are. You know what your product is about. So the innovation, as I said, like for example, we work for a few product companies. So there is some innovation that they do in the product themselves. They tend to be smaller compared to big innovations, but they are always evolving their products. But there are different ways of innovating. For example, some of our clients or companies that we worked for, they start creating an ecosystem. They provide integrations. They enrich not only the product itself, but everything that is around that product. And sometimes when they want, they really have a very different idea that is not related to the product. They would not pivot that product. A lot of companies, what they do, they start something internally and they spin off a new company. And then they have this new company now doing something else. This is a very different thing to do. But the innovative thing is still can exist, but it needs to be placed in a context because otherwise you're going to destroy the market share that you actually built.
And this is very common as well, that people try to, let's say, get that innovation by, for instance, buying another company, right? And then they assimilate that company and kill all of that
Kill the
innovation.
innovation. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
basically destroying their full investment, no?
Yeah.
On that. Well, not necessarily. They may be interested in IPs and other stuff, and not really in keeping the business. But if you are interested in what they're doing and keeping that innovation, then integrating is kind of like the death of it, no? Because the bigger culture will always eat the smaller culture, right? But you're right. There's actually an article from the Harvard Business Review, Sandra, that describes precisely that, what kind of strategies you can follow to innovate. And they talked about spinning up a different company. They talked about SEAL Team 6 kind of approach, like bring people from all of the departments, put them together in a room, and let them know. They talked about innovating within a particular space, so incremental innovation within the. So there are many aspects to that they discuss, and it's precisely what you're saying, right? It really depends on what it is, what type of innovation you're trying to achieve, no? And in what context that needs to have in order to be successful. Yeah?
There is just one. I know that we are running out of time. There is one question from German about, have you experienced the second system syndrome from MVP to a 1.0 version, and then the 2.0 version is a nightmare. I believe that we've seen some things like that. I would say that most people don't go from one version to another. They end up failing before that.
Well, we've seen 1.2,
But
2.0, and 3.0, and 1.0 is still there.
But I have a slightly different anecdote. Like, because for example, we were talking about going from MVP to scalable products, and some companies, like, they really get excited about the success of their MVP, and they end up giving, like, I don't know what the saying in English is, but like in Portuguese we say, like, you give your step that is bigger than your legs. That's kind of, I don't know if there is an equivalent in English for that. But basically, like, we were working with this startup that goes back quite a few years. They were one of the first, not unicorns because they never made it, but they were at some point the most well-funded startup in the UK. They were in the music industry. And we started working with them when they were 12 people. And they had this idea to do a lot of, to revolutionize, to disrupt the music industry, right? And it was for us working with them on the technology and helping to build a platform, it was a fantastic experience. But this is what happened. They were a very, very small company with some very good ideas, and we could work with them at the beginning, iterate very fast. As they created excitement in the initial MVP that was built. But the MVP was more of a prototype than an actual MVP because then the thing was not live, right? So I would treat that as more of a prototype than anything else. So a lot of excitement was created on that, not only in the UK, but in the US. All of a sudden, like in a space of 18 months, they went from 12 people to 300. And they had offices in London. They had a beautiful office in Los Angeles. They had like loads of other things and stuff. And they created this big buzz. They were everywhere. Everyone was talking about, but they still didn't have the version one actually released. And then, but the development team, like the technology bit, say, look, when we go, I remember those conversations. They say, look, this is an industry that either you have a lot of money to break into or you don't even try because it's a crowded industry, so you need a lot of investment. So they chased that money. They got that money and they poured all that money in all sorts of stuff, in marketing, offices, and technology. I remember that we were building like a huge platform to scale to millions of people before they even have the first version out. And and then what happened? They ran out of money. They lost credibility. The whole thing went tits up. And then
I remember they even convinced the investors that the big bang is the right approach because there were a lot of voices, including our own, to say like, go for the lean
let's
startup
go
approach,
live.
and they
Let's
were
go
like,
live.
the investors will kill us if we did that. If we created something subpar that but in the end, yes, and that was actually a prototype. It was like listening to Jose. The only people that were using the original thing that they got the big funding from was the family, friends, and fools. What they
Yeah,
used.
exactly. And then they went from nothing to a big thing to nothing in a space of 2 years. And this is what I was saying, that it's important for us to understand, to do the experiments, but we need just to build, the platform should just be built to support the experiments.
Yeah.
But for example, some companies try to scale way too fast, and I've seen that before. They had some initial feedback, some likes, and some votes, and then they go crazy in the scaling. So this should be gradual.
There is a lot of speculation as well in this, by the way. So it's about who's the last one who's going to be holding the hot potato, basically, right? I
Yeah.
talked about the investing, seed investors and all that stuff, right? Like
For me, it's a pyramid scheme,
Series
as I
A,
say.
Series B, exactly. Like especially if you do it that way, right? Like if you do it without having something solid, yeah, on which you're building, that's the thing,
And
right? 'Cause
solid in terms of ideas, not like platforms. They had a
no,
very solid
exactly.
platform to scale,
Not
but
even
the
ideas. I'm talking about business model.
business
I'm
model,
talking about
exactly.
business model, tried and
Yeah.
true business model. I
Yeah.
can make money with this, right? It's a matter
Yeah.
of tweaking and scaling and so on, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't have that. And uh, there's I was watching not that long ago an interview from a Spanish guy. They have this. I don't remember what it's called. They have this Lutz thing on Twitch. They're a startup. They're doing quite well. This guy started the company. They went to a Y Combinator in the US. Came back. Raised money, etc. So that they're doing fine now. But one of the things that the guy said is like, once you launch, things become really hard because now you have numbers. Before you're selling kind of like an idea. No, this is what it could be. Like here's the
Yeah.
billion,
Yeah.
the 100 return on the whatever it is. But once you're there and you have users and you have clients, that data is the one that
That could
people are
be
going to be
that big
using.
could be a bit for come down, isn't it?
Exactly. No, it's like then it's like, okay, then you need to hit this milestone in order to get this, unlock this funding and so on and so forth, right? So it is for speculation, it is better not to have released no than if
For
you're actually
speculation.
trying to. Yes, for speculation is better not to have released than to actually have released and get that data. And that, so again, it's a, if you're really trying to build a business. So one of the things I was is like, why are you doing it? No, if you're really trying to build a business, you want to go for that lean startup kind of approach, customer development. You validate, get out of the building. No, the mantra is get out of the building, try it out, see what, no, and then build on top of that. If not, then create some good PowerPoint presentations, hire a good designer to do the the brand and the right, and then go around shopping for an investor. You just need to be a really good salesperson, right? Sell an idea, paint a picture. um it is what it is.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're on the 5 minute mark. Yeah, I guess this is the time for last words. No, or last topics.
So I think that, like, for me, that the takeaways for this conversation for me is like lean startup is not just like do something, push it out, and try to learn something. Like as you were saying, Jose, like that is, it is far more than that. Like you really need to think about the business, and really trying to see what you are trying to achieve. When you create those experiments, you need to find a proper way to measure them. So for me, like you also need to adjust the technology, the infrastructure, so that it supports the volatility or the speed of those learnings. So there is a difference between scaling and having it stable. I think that while you are experimenting, it still needs to be stable, it still needs to be usable. It doesn't need to scale, but it still needs to work somehow. And also, I think that there is for a lot of people that watch us, like there are software cross people. They love the craft and making do things well and with quality and stuff. You need to calibrate your expectations or understand which kind of context that you are in, so that you are still doing things with quality, you're still doing things that are fit for purpose, but we need to understand the context. So within that context, you need to do your best, but you cannot just try to create the best ever platform, everything perfect, if that's not what the context needs. So those are some of my takeaways.
My takeaway would be that software building software is an expensive business, so avoid it as much as you can. And so if you can validate your ideas with creating a command prompt and just answering the question, do that. And do use other software and as much as you can, and again, validate the ideas, because this will help you move faster, but it will also help you scale. And when that becomes a problem, then you can start building custom solutions. So that whole kind of worldly map thing, like what is the custom thing that you need to do, and use commodity wherever you can. So that's, and I think the other insight I have is that as you grow, uh, the organization changes, the culture changes, and the culture for starting out to culture for having a mature product that you are trying to kind of evolve on, but you're supporting a big business on top of. They are two different things. You can still innovate, but not at the same kind of level and with the same kind of chaotic energy that you would do a startup. So there are differences, but the spirit of innovation does not need to die. You can still innovate, albeit not as revolution in a revolutionary way.
Okay. I guess you guys have covered a lot of stuff. What I would say is there is a bunch of great books, short and long. Like the Four Steps to Epiphany book is quite long. So I would recommend you to read that one. In fact, if you don't have much time, there's a thing called The Entrepreneur's Guide to the Customer Development Process, or the Customer Development. No, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. It's this really thin thing, explains most of lean startup, most of the customer, at least the two stages, validation, a bunch of things. So check it out. There's also Running Lean from the Lean Startup series, which is quite good, very applied. Lots of validation stuff, Lean Canvas, or all of this stuff. There is the Lean Analytics book, which I also found quite good if you're trying to get metrics to understand how the business is doing and so on. And I also wanted to recommend a talk that I saw like a very long time ago. This is from one of the first conferences that Eric Ries organized when he was starting like the Lean Startup movement and all this stuff. And it's a talk by a guy called David Binetti. I think it's called David Binetti on Botizen, a platform for boaters in the US. And I really like that talk because he really explained how he took customer development and Lean Startup and used that in order to navigate his business model through all of the hypotheses and things that they had. So it's very good for identifying, pivoting when, what to build, what to validate, like we're, rethinking your from where you are, no? So from the product that maybe is something, but it does solve a problem, but it may not necessarily be a business, and evolving all of that. So I found it quite interesting. I would recommend anyone to check it out. If we can, we'll put the link there. But David Binetti, Botizen, Lean Startup, something, the conference. I don't remember what the name was. Cool. Okay. So time for closing. Thanks everyone for your time. If you're still awake, remember, if you want to be part of these conversations, you can write on the chat as well. Leave us comments. We're doing this on Tuesday, so normally we will tweet a little bit ahead of time what the topic will be, and you can join us. And if you want to be notified when we're going live, subscribe, hit the notification button, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.